Hi, I've clicked on to today's tropical tidbit for Thursday, May 16th, and over here in the Eastern Pacific, we see that we've had a very fast start to their hurricane season, which began yesterday, and already we have Tropical Storm Alvin, the first of the year, that has developed centered right about here and is moving slowly west-northwestward, and some strengthening is likely, but not that much. There's a lot of shearing going on with the subtropical jet stream right here, and it appears that there is a lot of competition with the adjacent monsoon trough, which it is still embedded in and having trouble getting free from, so significant intensification is probably not on the table, and this probably won't become a hurricane as it runs into these upper level westerlies. However, it's indicating the activity that is starting to come eastward across the Pacific. Notice all the convection along the entire intertropical convergence zone here, which is indicating the MJO upward motion pulse coming across the globe. This is the analysis showing the proxy for upward motion in green and sinking motion in brown. Remember, the MJO is a planetary wave of upward and downward motion, sinking and rising air that propagates from west to east on long time scales of a few weeks or so. And this started out in the Indian Ocean when we had our twin cyclones over here last week. These green colors have now started to move in general across the Pacific. They're a little split right now, some over here, but they're starting to come across, and this kind of helped Alvin to form, and ironically will also probably help it die. But in general, these are coming eastward, and what happens now is if we look at the GFS ensemble forecast for week 2, the average for week 2 from May 23rd to May 30th, we see a lot of upward motion being focused in the Eastern Pacific and the Caribbean. And this is cause for concern for this area, because we are now at this time of year when we can start worrying about tropical cyclone development not only in the Eastern Pacific near Central America, but also in the Caribbean itself. This is not unheard of in late May. Even though the Atlantic hurricane season does not begin until June 1st, we can still get development in the Caribbean before that point. Only recently in 2008 we had Tropical Storm Arthur start off the season on May 31st. So it can happen. But we may be watching this pattern right into June itself as well. Now here's the GFS ensemble mean 500 millibar height anomaly forecast for days 11 through 15, showing a pattern where we have a trough in the west and we have a ridge ballooning up over the Great Lakes. And when you see this is a pattern where we have to watch for cutoff trough splits forming underneath the ridge and retrograding backwards. You can get a cutoff low here that retrogrades southwest into the Gulf of Mexico or the Northwest Caribbean underneath of this ridge, which is typical for a negative PDO pattern. If you can get the trough to stick around here and get the ridge to surge northeast, you can get retrograding troughs back underneath. This is something to watch for, because when this happens, cutoff lows or trough split remnants can help facilitate the development of convection underneath or to the southeast of them in the Caribbean and north of the Caribbean, and can aid in both rainfall and perhaps even tropical development. The thing about this pattern, though, is the fact that we already have a lot of upward motion showing up in the vicinity of Tropical Storm Alvin and will be coming eastward into the Eastern Pacific during the next 5 to 10 days. This is already going to throw a lot of outflow towards the east and northeast, strengthening the subtropical jet through the southern Gulf of Mexico and the Bahamas region by the time this forecast period comes around. And when you get a strong subtropical jet in here, it's going to resist upper lows cutting off and coming farther south than the jet axis itself, which implies to me that the upper lows, if they cut off here, if we do get trough splits, they're probably going to sit at around 25 north latitude to 30 north latitude and not much farther south than that, which means I don't think this will be a direct threat for facilitating direct development in the Caribbean, and we won't have upper lows getting this far south. What will happen, if this pattern verifies, is we can get a lot of wetness showing up for the southeastern U.S., Florida and the Bahamas specifically, and Cuba, as these upper lows spin around and support convection near and around them. And they can also try to draw extra moisture out from the monsoon circulation to their north. And if something does try to develop within the monsoonal gyre, it could be drawn north by such a cutoff. But this is still a long-range pattern, but something to watch, as the GFS and Canadian ensemble means have been fairly consistent in showing a pattern with ridging ballooning into the Great Lakes by the end of the month, which means we have to watch underneath, and that's probably what we'll end up having to do. The Canadian is particularly bullish, as expected. By day 10, it actually shows one of these cutoffs developing dual cyclones, one in the Carolinas, one in the Caribbean. This is overblown, as the Canadian usually is in the longer range. And in general, it generally spins up cyclones. But I don't want you to focus on this map. What I want you to focus on is this map. This is the Canadian ensemble mean precipitation anomaly for week 2. The important part about this pattern is not the specifics, because we're still looking at the long range beyond day 10. What matters here is that you see this. Lots of wetness in the eastern Pacific, indicating an active tropical genesis region in here. And then we have a lot of wet northeast of the Bahamas, which indicates the upper troughs coming down over Florida and the Bahamas and generating wetness in here. The danger is that the connection between these two could be a tropical cyclone getting drawn across into the monsoonal circulation and into the northwestern Caribbean, where we get development somewhere in between here when we have one of these upper lows drawing moisture northeastward out of the deep tropics. That could happen. And the GFS is a little bit more focused with the wet precipitation in the Caribbean, showing the danger of an active monsoonal circulation here. It is possible that this rotates out into the Caribbean and you get some kind of development in here. But at this point, it is simply too far out, and we just don't know whether we will get a focused area of low pressure over the water that will develop. What we do know is that this pattern has been consistent on the models, and ever since the twin Indian cyclones developed, it has been apparent to me that this upward motion pulse from the MJO would propagate across eventually by the end of the month and influence the Caribbean. And what matters here is the fact that we have a wet pattern that is deeply connected to tropical activity and could result in tropical cyclogenesis, but it is far from a guaranteed thing, and we may never get it, but the point is that it gets wet in here. And so if anything, the folks in the Caribbean islands and Central America and Florida and the Bahamas should be watching for a wetter pattern developing during the last week of May and likely into the first week of June as well. Notice how the GFS was too early, because originally it had tropical cyclones running around in here by May 20th, and that's 4 days from today. That's not going to happen. So as I mentioned before, the GFS was too fast with this progression. It has now shifted to a more reasonable setting where it really doesn't get this going until the final days of the month and into early June. And it has the MJO sticking around for a long time. The Canadian moves the MJO out by the first week of June. It remains to be seen whether that will happen or whether it will stick around, but we may be dealing with this kind of a pattern, which is wetter than normal in the Caribbean area, for a couple of weeks during the end of this month and the beginning of June. And anywhere during that time frame, it could support the development of our first storm in the Atlantic or additional storms in the eastern Pacific. Both will have to be watched, but in general, a wet pattern, and we will see if any kind of tropical mischief happens to come out of it. Still in the long range, but we will watch it, and I will keep you up to date. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.